In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter and his companion Lord George Carnarvon entered Tutankhamun's tomb, an event captured in a photograph that still captures the imagination of people today. The tomb is the only one in ancient Egypt that remained intact for 3,000 years, and when it was opened, it appeared to be full of gold and artifacts. But why did the 13 people who were present at the opening die in a mysterious way soon after? And how come Tutankhamun had no heart and was buried in a second-hand coffin? Join us as we dive deeper into the tomb of Tutankhamun. The tomb of Tutankhamun confused researchers from the very beginning. Instead of a pompous and spacious hole, they found themselves in a small, cramped room that looked like a warehouse. The location of the tomb also raised questions, as Tutankhamun was buried far from his royal ancestors. According to ancient Egyptians, this prevented the pharaoh from being reunited with his family to rule in the spiritual world. They also believed that a pharaoh came close to the gods after his death and spoke to them on behalf of his people. That's why the mummification process was treated with special care, and tombs were decorated with great reverence. But why did they make an exception for Tutankhamun? All the indications are that Tutankhamun got second-hand attributes. He lay within a nest of 3 golden coffins, which fitted one inside another. They all looked like the god of the dead Osiris, lying on his back and holding the crook and flail in his crossed arms. But the middle coffin had a slightly different style, and its face didn't look like the faces on the other 2 coffins, nor did it look like the face on Tutankhamun's death mask. Egyptologists assumed that among the 3 coffins, this middle coffin, along with some of Tutankhamun's other grave goods, was initially made for the mysterious Neferneferuaden. It turned out that this woman was an enigmatic ruler, whose name is recorded in inscriptions on the walls. Apparently, she lived at the time of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father, but died earlier and could never assert authority on her own. Therefore, her trail got lost in history. In addition, the undertakers cut off the part of the coffin that protruded from the sarcophagus, preventing the lid from closing. Later, archaeologists found fragments of Osiris's sawn-off toes at the bottom of the sarcophagus. Nothing could erase the fact that Tutankhamun was buried hastily. After all, archaeologists found traces of readjustment everywhere, indicating that the tomb itself was intended for another dignitary. Likely, the pharaoh died suddenly, and no one was prepared for that. In 2010, DNA analyses were conducted on King Tut's remains and those of his relatives. The researchers revealed that King Tut was most likely the product of incest between the pharaoh Akhenaten and one of his sisters. In ancient Egypt, the practice of inbreeding was widespread among the royals who believed themselves to be descendants of the gods and sought to maintain pure bloodlines. This trend is believed to have contributed to higher rates of congenital defects among rulers, such as King Tut's cleft palate and club foot. King Tut would eventually marry his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, who was the daughter of his father and his father's chief wife. However, fate had other plans for Tutankhamun. During a chariot ride one day, he fell off the chariot and landed in a way that was catastrophic. The chariot didn't stop, but turned around and went right across the young pharaoh's chest, breaking his bones and squashing his heart. The pharaoh's body was rushed to the morticians as quickly as possible, but the beating Egyptian sun caused it to decompose faster than usual. Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't ready, so he was placed in a cramped closet and haphazardly mummified. The rituals that were usually carried out during the mummification process had to be given up, and the heart spot was filled with a handful of scarab beetle amulets. 3,000 years later, archaeologists discovered Tutankhamun's mummy. However, the process of removing the mummy from the coffin was not without incident. A skull fragment was dislodged from the mummy during the removal process. But that wasn't the end of the strange occurrences surrounding Tutankhamun's mummy. The mummy was found to be burnt when forensic scientists performed a virtual autopsy on it. It seemed unlikely that anyone burned the king's body on purpose, since ancient Egyptians held their deceased rulers in high regard. Moreover, the mummy was burnt while still sealed inside the coffin, making it hard to deny the existence of a curse. Further examination of the mummy's flesh fragment showed that it was set on fire due to a chemical reaction caused by the embalming oils used during the mummification process. This was a rare exception, but it led to the idea of the curse of the pharaohs. After numerous scientists and archaeologists involved in the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb died in mysterious circumstances, a belief in the curse theory gained popularity worldwide. The legend of the supposed curse of the pharaoh grew to epic proportions, capturing the imagination of people and causing fear. As time went on, the number of victims associated with the curse increased, and their stories further contributed to its mystique. Next up are the stories of 8 individuals whose experiences may make you believe in the curse of the pharaoh. Before we do, make sure to subscribe to Space Unearthed. The first victim of the curse was George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. He financed the excavation of King Tut's tomb, and just a few months after the tomb was opened, he accidentally tore open a mosquito bite while shaving. He died shortly thereafter from blood poisoning, and legend has it that all the lights in his house, or perhaps all the lights in Cairo, mysteriously went out when he passed. Sir Bruce Ingham, a friend of the archaeologist who discovered the tomb, was given a paperweight as a gift. The paperweight was a mummified hand wearing a bracelet that was supposedly inscribed with the phrase, "Cursed be he who moves my body." Not long after receiving the gift, Ingham's house burned to the ground, and when he tried to rebuild it, it was hit with a flood. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier and railroad executive, visited the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1923 and fell sick almost immediately afterward. He never really recovered and died of pneumonia a few months later. Hugh Evelyn White, a British archaeologist who visited King Tut's tomb and may have helped excavate the site, saw death sweep over about 24 of his fellow excavators. By 1924, he died by suicide, but not before allegedly writing in his own blood, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." American Egyptologist EMBER was friends with many of the people who were present when King Tut's tomb was opened, including Lord Carnarvon. EMBER died in 1926, when his house in Baltimore burned down less than an hour after he and his wife hosted a dinner party. Sadly, they and the family's maid died in the catastrophe while attempting to save EMBER's manuscript, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Richard Bethell, Lord Carnarvon's secretary and the first person behind Carter to enter the tomb, died in 1929 under suspicious circumstances. Though no evidence was found to support a connection between the artifacts and his death, Bethell was found smothered in his room at an elite London gentleman's club. The Nottingham Evening Post speculated that Bethell might have been cursed, especially as there were mysterious fires at his home, where some of the priceless finds from Tutankhamun's tomb were stored, proving that you didn't have to be one of the excavators or expedition backers to fall victim to Tutankhamun's curse. Sir Archibald Douglas Reid, a radiologist, merely X-rayed Tut before the mummy was given to museum authorities. He got sick the next day and was dead 3 days later. James Henry Breasted, another famous Egyptologist, was a member of Carter's team when King Tut's tomb was opened. Shortly thereafter, he returned home to find that his pet canary had been eaten by a cobra. The cobra was still occupying the cage, a rather ominous sign, as the cobra is a sign of the Egyptian monarchy and a motif that kings wore on their headdresses to represent protection. Breasted himself didn't die until 1935, although his death did occur immediately after a trip to Egypt. These are just a few of the many stories that grew up around the curse of the pharaohs. Whether or not you believe in such things, there is no denying that the legend has captured the imaginations of people around the world.